Welcome back to the cafe, everybody. It's great to see you today. It is Wednesday, April 30th. It's over almost. And we are back with cold copy and a cold case today. We're looking at the very well known case of the Black Dahlia murder, still unsolved after all these years. There's rumors going around about it possibly, but it's still unsolved. So we're looking into it, guys. For those of you that may not know about it, you're going to love this one. And for those of you that do, well, you know the deal. So that being said, you know what happens next. Let's do this thing, everybody. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Welcome back to the True Crime Cafe, guys. It is Copy and a Cold Case Day, and we're looking into the Black Dahlia murder. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, quite an interesting case from a long, long time ago that is still basically unsolved. They've had a couple, I guess, possibilities with it over the years, but nothing. So we'll see what happens here. What we come up with, and I do have another video. I do believe it's somebody claiming to be that his father is the one that murdered her, so on and so forth. Miss Elizabeth Short was her name. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. It's an interesting story at the very least, and pretty wild situation. So let's see here. Come on in, everybody. Grab a seat if you will. Get comfortable, please, and thank ya. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and good night to you, wherever you are, whoever you are. I hope it's good for you guys because it's great to be here with you guys. I appreciate you guys joining me so very much for this. And again, thank you for all of you that joined us last night. Great show, as always, with all of you. Appreciate that so very much as well. Let's see who we have in here with us today so far. Of course, the SRBBBBB, Dagburn, Johnny Gobbles, Dead Floozy Mama. Welcome back to you. Great to see you. Eddie's in the house. One made not great to have you back. Judy Covington, thank you so much for joining us once again. Mark Schumann, I hope you had a great birthday yesterday, my friend. Thank you for joining us again today. In Stitch is in the house. Good to see you today as well. Sassy Cassie, welcome back to you. Great to see you. Aurora, welcome back. Great to have you here. Good to see you today. Jesse Shule, always a pleasure to see you, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us today. Love Quinn Goldberg, welcome. Good to see you today. Thank you for joining us. Let me see, making sure I'm not missing anybody here. Miss Paula, wonderful to see you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Such an honor to have you here. The lovely Miss Wisdom speaks in the house as well. Thank you for joining us, as always. All right. I think Donna Salamander, welcome and happy hump day to you. Great to see you today. Yes, sir, Mr. Mark. Let me see here. I think I got everybody so far. Come in and find a comfortable chair, guys. Grab your cup of Joe and let's break this down. The Black Dahlia story. Wild story, guys. Very interesting to say the least. For those of you that aren't familiar. And you guys might know it. Most people do. Once I start getting into it, you might figure it out. Let's see here. Come on, come on, come on. Yeah, I think I did get everybody then. Jesse. SRB is an exclamation point in the chat today, or I guess the other way you could say it. That was too funny. That was too funny. I love it. Yeah, that was pretty wild. Kane said that to Sarge last night about taking a nap. I was like, dude, what are you talking about? That was wild. Very wild. Karen Edith, welcome. Yeah, it was a good movie. Definitely a good movie. Based on a true story for sure. Tracy's in the house. Good to see you today. 25 peeps in here with 16 likes, guys. That's awesome. We're catching up. Please, let's see if we can make a match if possible. Great to see you guys again. How many of you guys are familiar with the Black Dahlia story? Throw one in the chat for me if you could. Please and thank you. Let's see. We did, Stitches. We got a storm. Little one, not big, but it was a little bit. It went up, kind of mostly went around us, but up where Terry Martin lives, they got hit pretty hard. Knocked their power out. Wonderful to see you, Tracy. Hello, hello. It's great to have you here, Miss Donna. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you so very much. Let's see here. Sassy, don't be trying to convert people to your sassiness. I'm going to run a poll on this one, guys. Very simple. Let's see. So the poll is real simple. It's, will the Black Dahlia case ever be solved? Because it's been around for a long time. It's a yes, no, and I'm not sure answer if you guys would like to answer that. I like running these polls from time to time. Aurora, wonderful to have you here, says, I am. It was my mother's favorite cold case. My mother was a huge, oh, that's amazing. I'm so sorry to hear that she passed. Right. Definitely interesting. Thank you for sharing that with me, Aurora. Appreciate that. All right. Come on in, everybody. Grab a chair, please. Get yourselves comfortable. Yes, Miss SRB loves the polls. It was in California, Donna, yes. I believe it was in Hollywood, to be honest with you. We will find out for sure through this story here that when we run it. Yes, there was one, Mark. At least one. I agree with you 100%. You are right. Let me see here. And of course, with this case, there's not a whole lot of news segments because of how long ago it happened. I did find one to run. That was based off of the 50th anniversary when that hit. Micro Blues in the house. Good to see you. Good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today. Oh boy. I hope you guys are having a great day. Or I think, is there 30 or 31 days in this month? I think we might have one more day. I can't remember. Come on in, everybody. All right, got you. That's wild. Wild, Aurora. 30. What do you mean 30? Did I? Is that an answer to something oh, said? Wait a minute. Make sure to leave an answer in that poll running, guys. Will the Black Dahlia case ever be solved? Mm. Thank you. Thank you, SRB. 30 days. So this is the last day of the month. May starts tomorrow. Already. May 1st. Thank you, Wisdom. Okay. 27 peeps in the house. Thank you guys so much for being here. 19 likes. Let's see if we can make that match, guys, and maybe get this close to the algorithm. Please and thank you. It's gonna be May. That's right. It is fly. It's going by quick. It seems like it was just last month. It was January. That's right. April showers bring those beautiful May flowers. I know. Tomboy's fault. She's not even in here. She was in there, but she's not in here. She cracks me up sometimes, I swear. Got some there's a possibility of another show this afternoon. The plan is, if so, to review some of the MSM stuff that's out there and so on and so forth, based on what, again, I went through my emails just a few minutes ago, and there's some requests. We'll see, though. I can't promise that for sure, guys. We'll see what happens. And Mods just asked me if I was doing a show this afternoon. I said, oh, I don't know, maybe not, maybe, who knows? And now I'm just telling you now that we might. So there you go, SRB. More indecisiveness from me. Oh, there's Mama Bear. Guys, remember her? Do you remember her? We don't see her much anymore. She can't smack me. She's not close to me. I can say what I won't. And no, I wasn't talking about you. I am now. Thank you for being here, Mama Burr. $30 people in the house. That's awesome. Guys, on your way in the door, please make sure to hit the like button if you would. If you could, please, because you know you should. We're rhyming again. It's rapping time. Please, 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 could you, would you? Appreciate that very much, guys. It definitely helps out. And if you can, please leave a comment. That's a big one. We really appreciate that. Here at the cafe. That we do. That we do. Mama Bear's not feeling good again, guys. She's got a weather related headache, I'll call it. Gotta love it this time of year when all this seasonal change stuff is crazy. Hopefully she'll be back with us tomorrow. Yes, this is Caden's last month ever in life of school. He graduates this month, just here in a couple weeks. So, geez, it went by so I can't believe he's done already. That's gonna be hard. El Bariqua, welcome. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Happy hump day to you. Is there any new information on out? Not really. There's another interview that was done with Ashley Banfield. Court TV is doing a segment that we might run later if I do that other show, which I'm probably going to do it, Tracy. I plan on reviewing stuff like that if we can. So we'll see. We can go through all that information there. And anybody that missed any of the documents, I'm just going to explain the document that dropped yesterday. But then again, you never know. They could drop while we're here because they do it all the time. It is Tuesday. Tuesday and Fridays are the days that they seem to usually fall out. Or it's Wednesday. Sorry, Door. They usually drop Tuesdays and Fridays, so they could have put something else out. I talked about the newest 3 last night a little bit. So we will see. There's a grand possibility I'll be in here this afternoon too. Thanks for asking, Tracy. I appreciate it. Dramamine, that's awesome. Never heard of that. And I see why it would work. That's a good idea. All right, you guys. Let's get this stuff moving.
Killed, then sliced in half at the waist with surgical precision.
50 years ago tonight, that discovery began a mystery that would become the most infamous unsolved murder in the history of Los Angeles and maybe the United States.
Tony Valdez is live in the Crenshaw district with a look at the Black Dahlia murder. Tony.
Christine, this is Norton Avenue between Coliseum Street and 39th. 50 years ago, most of these homes hadn't been built. And so in the very early morning hours of Wednesday, January 15th, 1947, someone who had a dead body to get rid of decided that this spot right about here would be the perfect place to dump it. Over the vacant lot where the nude body of a young woman had been found. In real life, it was Betty Bersinger who called police after realizing that it was a dead woman, not a discarded department store mannequin that was lying in the vacant lot down the street from her home. The first person to see the body up close was Los Angeles Examiner reporter Will Fowler. He heard the call on his police radio and arrived before anyone else.
When I got up to it, I turned to my photographer and I said, "Hey, Felix," I said, "this woman's cut in half."
The pictures that Felix Pagel took were much too gruesome, even for a Hearst newspaper. So the Examiner's art department painted a blanket over the body and airbrushed away the grotesque damage to the woman's face. Here's the same photo in its nearly original form. Body details have been deliberately removed.
Where the body was cut in half, it was done very, very almost professionally, like a meat cutter or a guy who had knowledge of dressing deer down in the field or something like that.
Fowler also saw evidence of torture and mutilation all over the girl's body.
Plus, trigger warning. Content may include sensitive or violent content, not suitable for all viewers. Feel free to step out if needed.
All right, just in case, you guys.
Been drained of all its blood, scrubbed clean with a bristle brush, and her hair had been shampooed.
The only thing is I touched her eyes because they're open and I figured they should be closed.
A newspaper artist was called in again, this time to the morgue, to try to give a face to the body with the toe tag that read Jane Doe number 1. As the artist tried different interpretations, the Examiner was using an early version of a fax machine to send the body's fingerprints to
Washington. Within hours, instead of days, there was a positive identification. The dead woman was 22-year-old Elizabeth Short. Her photo and her fingerprints were on file because she had worked at Camp Cook near Santa Barbara during World War II.
Long ago and far away.
She was born in Boston on July 29, 1924, to Cleo and Phoebe Short. He built miniature golf courses. She raised their 5 daughters. Elizabeth was always described as the shy and quiet one.
She was a very affectionate, sweet girl. And if she was out at night, she always stopped in my bedroom to talk. And she would talk and tell everything that she had done and everything.
As Cleo's business prospered, the family moved to Medford, Massachusetts. That's where artist Mary Passios grew up, idolizing her older friend Betty.
She was, oh, beautiful, statuesque, and had a real warmth about her. She loved people.
The next big break came from the Atwater Hotel in Long Beach.
I'm gonna tell you guys something. This era, I always felt like I should have been born then, been my age, an adult back then. I always loved this era, the clothing, the music, the atmosphere, every bit of it. I always thought I should have been around back then, as compared to now. You know what I mean? I guess maybe I have an old soul or whatever that's called. But yeah, I've always been mesmerized with that era and that time. Welcome, Alicia. It's okay, hon. No apologies needed.
Herald Express reporter Bevo Means discovered that Elizabeth Short had lived there briefly and that her wardrobe of dark clothing had earned her a nickname, the Black Dahlia. It was a spin-off from the Blue Dahlia, the name of a popular 1946 movie that had been showing at a theater around the corner. The first murder suspect was Red Manley, a traveling salesman who lived in Southgate with his wife and child. He had given Elizabeth a ride from San Diego to downtown Los Angeles. Manley dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel. It was the evening of January 9th, nearly a week before she was murdered. It was the last confirmed sighting of the Black Dahlia alive. With Manley's help, detectives found luggage Elizabeth had checked at the Greyhound bus station. Inside a suitcase, they found candles that provided the wax she had used to fill the cavities in her teeth. There were cryptic, unsigned telegrams. One from Washington, D.C. read, "A promise is a promise to a person of the world." And there were several love letters she had written but never sent, all of them addressed to servicemen. 9 days after the body was found, an envelope was sent to the examiner. Inside were Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her Social Security card, as well as an address book with several missing pages. Everything had been soaked in gasoline to remove fingerprints. There was also a promise that the killer would surrender. He or she never did. Red Manley was eventually cleared as a suspect, but not before some tense moments at detective headquarters. On the left of the photo are Manley's wife, Harriet, and his father, William. Across the table are the Black Dahlia's sister, Virginia, and her mother. Meanwhile, men all over the United States, as well as a few women, began to claim that they were the Black Dahlia's killer. They came to be known as Confessin' Sams, but not one of the more than 500 self-proclaimed killers knew facts about the murder that had been kept secret by police. In their search for the killer, police questioned people like Lynn Myers, a former roommate, and George Price, a Hollywood photographer who reportedly had taken pinup pictures of the Black Dahlia. By the time Elizabeth Short was buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, detectives had found that the aspiring actress knew a lot of men, that she had never lived in any one place for very long, and that in one of her life's great ironies, she was not all that she appeared to be. Harry Hansen was one of the original Black Dahlia detectives.
There was no record of any solicitation, offering, resorting, or prostitution in any form. She'd bait and take all she could get and give out nothing. She wouldn't put out.
The fact is that she couldn't. Sources familiar with the autopsy findings and members of Elizabeth's family confirm that she had a physical condition which made sexual intercourse virtually impossible.
It's a stigma that was attached to this whole thing.
Yes, Mark. Mark says, Dago, did you hear of Steve Hodel? He wrote a book about his father, who was a doctor that he thought was the Black Dahlia. It's called, yeah, I think we have a video on that I was going to show you guys after this. I think he's the one that is claiming that his father is the one that did this. So it's interesting. But yeah, it came out years after the fact, so we'll see. Thanks, Mark.
Portrayed in the press as this, this prostitute who wore black clothes that walked the back streets and the back alleys of all the major cities the nation, and which was really farthest from the
Thank you so much for joining us today, Judy. Appreciate you being here.
Finally found in death the fame that eluded her in life. The answer's not on Norton Avenue, where there's nothing that even hints at what happened here so long ago, but in Medford, right off Interstate 93, there's a monument to the Black Dahlia's life and death. It was paid for by Kyle Wood, a young man who hadn't even been born yet when Elizabeth Short was killed by person or persons unknown.
Tomorrow night, when this 50th anniversary special report concludes, we'll show you some of the theories about who killed the Black Dahlia and why. Reporting live from the Crenshaw District, I'm Tony Valdez. John, Christine, back to you.
Thank you, Tony. Fascinating look back.
Sure is.
Final return.
All right, guys. Guys, please make sure to hop on over and hit like and subscribe if you have not yet. Hit the notification bell for Mama Bear's channel, guys. The link is right there. And of course, we cannot forget the lovely Miss Wisdom Speaks. She does so many things for the missing Indigenous and missing in general with her channel. So please check her out and subscribe and like her channel as well, guys. We also want to throw Mikey's link in here too for the last 24. All three amazing channels. Of course, Mama Bear co-host here. We know that her channel, we really want to get her channel moving. We've been trying to, I should say. So please make sure that you guys subscribe to all those channels. I'd appreciate that so very much, as would they. I can promise you that. Oh, let's see. All right, guys. So that is that pretty neat news segment there on that. This case is just I don't know. I have like I said, I have a really big interest in that era in general, whether it be, you know, the mob, the mobsters, this story, everything with that is related to that era and that time really has always really enthralled me. All right, on we go to the next piece of info here. If I can find it, where to go. Better be here. Bear with me, you guys. We're going to get there in a second. You know what happened here. And of course, it's moving slow as it always does. Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you, Alicia SRB, for putting those links in there. You guys are amazing. Okay, I think this is going to work. Is it going to work for me? There's been many people that have put this out. Done amazing jobs with it as well. Bailey Syrian, many other larger channels have done this too, and they've done great jobs with it. Come on, load in for me. Here we go. All right, here we go. Sorry, guys. And let me know if the audio is okay and all that. Welcome, Cap. Good to see you. Green-Eyed Monster, welcome to you as well. Appreciate you guys joining us today.
For Betty Bersinger, this walk would be anything but normal. While walking along the undeveloped lots in Leimert Park, She noticed what at first glance appeared to be a mannequin, until she got closer. What she saw was one of the most horrific and soon to be infamous murders in the history of the United States. Lifelessly staring back at her was the recently deceased Elizabeth Short. And before we continue the mystery at hand, let's talk a little bit about Elizabeth, or Betty as she prefers to be called. Over the years, she has been riddled with an exorbitant amount of misinformation. You see, if you read articles about her or watch YouTube videos, you are going to hear so many ridiculous things. You most likely hear that Betty was a girl that loved to party, that she dated a mobster, that she dabbled in prostitution, and she was last seen at the Cecil Hotel. You'll also hear that she was a lesbian, her middle name was Anne, hell, even the name of the origin, the Black Dahlia, which is often said to have come from the press to sell more paper, is completely false, as we'll get to later. As you can probably tell, most of, if not all of these fabrications that are still believed to be true to this day came from the yellow journalism of the 40s. You see, back in the 1940s, well, hell, even today in some cases, a practice known as yellow journalism was widely used, and it involved highly exaggerated headlines in order to increase their sales, and often featured no ounces of effort in their research. In this case, the blame predominantly falls to the William Randolph Hearst-owned Los Angeles Examiner and the Herald Express, although most newspapers at the time also covered the murder extensively. See, in 1947, there were 4 major papers, all fighting for readers in Los Angeles. There was the LA Times, the Examiner, the Herald Express, and the Daily News. The fairly conservative Times and the Examiner were the morning edition papers. The Herald Express was published in the afternoon, and the Daily News was a cheap tabloid paper that published at all times of the day. The Examiner and Herald Express both greatly emphasized crime, often to a sensational degree. The Times most ignored the crime, and Daily News posted garbage nonsense constantly. The Examiner was the largest of all 4 papers and the most morally dubious, for reasons we will get to. The Herald Express is one of the key reasons why people assume this was the work of a serial killer, because they constantly made comparisons to other murders at the time. But the Examiner was definitely the paper most associated with the Black Dahlia. The paper more or less ran its own investigation and played a key role in the discovery of evidence and a key suspect, along with other less helpful information. As a direct result of the actions taken by the Examiner, Herald Express, and other smaller papers, people believed the many falsehoods that were reported, and later on, various works of fiction would draw inspiration from these falsehoods, creating even more lies. Even more lies were intentionally or not spread by people writing articles, videos, or books decades down the road inspired by that same false information. Even the best intentions often fail because virtually all the books on the subject are drawing from this false information. So, unless you live in LA, you're at the mercy of decades of bad research. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. With all that being said, though, now let me tell you guys what Betty Short was really like. Born on July 29th, 1924, Betty's short life in many ways was pretty tragic. Her early life was spent in Medford, Massachusetts, and when she was just 5 years old, her family was struck by the Great Depression, as many Americans were. Her father built miniature golf courses for a living, but in 1930 that business was completely squashed, and her father subsequently abandoned them. To make matters even worse, she also suffered from asthma, prompting her to move to Florida at the age of 16 to escape the harsh winters of Massachusetts. This would be her first time moving in a life that would be full of constant moving. Unlike what articles stated about her personality, she was described by a multitude of people, such as neighbors and actresses, as being a pretty and nice girl who was well behaved and innocent, which contradicts most articles already, which painted her as this party goer. The worst that could be said is that she was sometimes a tease. Anyways, eventually her father, Cleo Short, would return, sending her some money, and she subsequently moved in with him in California. However, their relationship was never close, as she was out of the house more often than not, before moving back to Florida in 1944, following an arrest, and she ended up falling in love with Major Matthew Martin Gordon Jr., who was in the United States Army Air Force and was tragically killed just a year later after a plane crash. That is, of course, if you believe her version of the events, but again, we'll get to that. In 1946, she would move to LA after meeting another pilot in Florida, Lieutenant Joseph Gordon Fickling, and during these last few months, her situations were quite sporadic, as there were 3 confirmed places she lived in this time span. There was a rented place at 6024 Carlos Ave under the name Mark Hansen, who you'll hear about more later. There was the Hawthorne Hotel on Orange Drive and the Chancellor Apartments at 1842 North Cherokee, which, as a side note, is the only location that is still standing all these years later. These sporadic living conditions are a result of her being unemployed during this entire span of her life. She more or less lived off the kindness of strangers. This again contradicts a popular part of the lore, which is the fact that she was a waitress at this time. This is also where the ultra-famous nickname Black Dahlia came from, despite what once again is rumored to be true. It's commonly believed that she earned this nickname due to the press, but it actually was conceived at a drugstore Betty used to frequent in Long Beach. Customers would often call her the Black Dahlia due to how she wore her hair and because of the popular 1946 noir film The Blue Dahlia. The original working name popular in the papers was the Werewolf Murder due to the brutal nature, but instead, Black Dahlia caught on like wildfire and the press took all the credit. Towards the end, she took a trip to San Diego and ended up moving into the household of the French family, and they described her again as never staying in the home. She was always out and about. During one of her times out, she met a man named Robert Red Manley, who she got along great with, and who even offered her a job interview, which she would never attend. After getting kicked out of the French family's home, she went to Manley, who drove her back to LA and dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel late on January 9th, and what would be the last time anyone saw her alive. For 6 days, she was unaccounted for until the morning of the 15th. Now, if I can describe Betty as a person, I would say she was tragic and confusing. Nearly everyone who knew her described her as being very well-mannered and an overall good person, but due to her financial situation throughout her entire life, especially towards the end, she would often lie in order to gain sympathy out of people. For example, while she claimed Matthew Gordon was the love of her life, his family claims Betty made up the whole love story. Another lie was the famous myth of her being a wannabe film starlet. Despite reportedly telling her mother, Phoebe, it's likely that she lied about wanting to be a film star since there was no evidence of her ever attending casting calls or anything of the sort. It is still entirely possible she wanted to be an actress. However, even if this was true, it was not the root cause of her moving to LA like it's often claimed to be. While these actions are morally questionable, I wouldn't call her a bad person or anything. I'd call her a tragic one. And speaking of
And a lot of these things that they're describing her as, from everything I've read on it, is one of the main things that a lot of people believe could have been what caused her death. She's kind of a, sadly, like a modern day, like a con artist per se, played into people's sympathies and so on and so forth to survive per se. They called her a tease. That she would, expect people to do this, and that for her, but then would not do anything in return. So on and so forth. A scammer, yeah, good way to put it. It's believed that played into her death, possibly, that she just pushed one too many men, playing games with them, and her lifestyle played into this. They're saying it, which does make some sense to me. So there is that. As far as possibilities for motive, but the way it was done, as you'll find out, was so traumatic. Yeah, she could have been what we call catfisher too, per se, these days. So it's a good point, SRB, good point. So we'll see what comes of it, guys.
of tragedy, it's time to go back to that day, January 15th, 1947. As stated before, she was spotted in an undeveloped lot in South Norton Avenue, where she was drained of blood and resembled a mannequin more than a human. The most disturbing part, she was cut into 2 pieces between the second and third lumbar vertebrae, and the cut was so clean that not a single internal organ was even touched, suggesting that this could have only been done by a skilled surgeon. Her arms, legs, and neck all featured ligature marks, indicating that she was tied down. Death had been brought on by multiple lacerations to her face after being knocked unconscious by repeated blows to the head. The mutilation occurred after she passed away. She was also heavily washed, and as such, no fingerprints could be found, a key reason why this mystery has lasted to this day. Betty was identified by law enforcement after matching her fingerprints with the prints taken following her arrest in 1943. After the identification, Betty's mother, Phoebe, had to be informed of what happened to her child. Unfortunately, the LAPD were not the ones to break it to her. It was the Examiner. Rewrite man Wayne Sutton and city editor Jimmy Richardson called Phoebe and told her that Betty had won a beauty contest. They prodded her for information about Betty until they felt she wasn't giving anything useful. They then bluntly told Phoebe her daughter hadn't won anything. She was dead. One other strange event worth noting was that 10 days
Yeah, there was a story just that was about that exact same thing, SRB. So yeah, I agree with you. That's probably what it is.
after the investigation, the Examiner was mailed some of Betty's personal belongings, which included her social security card, birth certificate, and an old address book with some missing pages that belonged to the aforementioned Mark Hansen. All other letters sent in were deemed hoaxes by the LAPD. No fingerprints were retrieved from the letter. So now that we have a background of who Betty was as a person, and now that we've explained the condition of the body, what we're going to do is just jump right into the suspects. Since this is such a famous case, there have been literally over 100 suspects listed throughout the years. So we're going to heavily narrow it down to include the most popular suspects, and obviously, we will include what we think is the most likely suspect. So, without further ado, let's dive in. The first suspect we must talk about is Robert Manley, who we mentioned earlier. If you don't remember, Manley was the very last person with her, as he was the man that dropped Betty off at the Biltmore, and as such, he has always been a very popular suspect in this case. But was Manley actually behind this? Well, let's first look at who Robert Manley actually was. There isn't a ton of info available about Manley, but we do know that he was in the military and was actually discharged due to mental illness. Because of this and the fact that he hooked up with Betty, it's easy to understand why he was such a popular suspect. And when investigators found out about this information, they ran a polygraph test on him, which he passed. Although it's worth noting that early polygraphs were primitive as hell and couldn't be used in court anyway. Jumping way forward to the 50s, he was committed to a mental hospital where, for one final time, they ran another test on him to see if he was truly behind this case after all. And once again, it was proven that he was not. Apparently, these never-ending suspicions on whether or not he was the suspect of this case really destroyed Manley mentally, who was already an unstable man. So, while he had a troubling past and was the last person that Betty interacted with, he was absolutely not the person behind this case. Consider this one debunked. The next suspect that we felt the need to shed some light on was Mark Hansen, who was another guy that we mentioned previously. Mark Hansen was the business manager of the Florentine Gardens nightclub. The Danish-born businessman also ran quite a few second-run theaters in the LA area, such as the Mark Hall, and was famously shy and private. The reason he became a suspect was because of the items sent to the Examiner 10 days after the event, which, as we stated, contained an address book owned by Hansen himself. We also specified that Betty actually stayed at Mark Hansen's place for a little while, which was...
Welcome, Dan. Great to have you here, brother. And that's awesome. I've always wanted to go there. Always. So that's cool to hear. Glad to have you here, brother.
something that left us confused for a little bit, but not much was actually known about their relationship at all, until Jiff emailed Larry Harnish, who cleared things up. He logically answered the question, reminding us that this was very soon after World War II and America was under a housing crisis. Therefore, people taking others in wasn't actually too uncommon, and this was just one of those situations. Betty actually lived with Hansen on 2 separate occasions as well, where 2 different moments of friction caused her to move out. Originally, Betty and a friend lived with Hansen, but Hansen apparently did not like her friend, which caused both of them to move out. Her friend eventually left Hollywood, but Betty moved back to Hansen's place as she had nowhere else to go. This second stint was again short-lived, though as after some sort of dispute, Betty moved out again, where she went to the aforementioned Chancellor Apartments, and finally, San Diego. Overall, they didn't have nearly as complex of a relationship as initially thought, as these types of situations were actually more common than previously thought. Hansen was married at the time, but this didn't stop him from flirting with various women, possibly including Betty, but it didn't go any further than that. Again, though, it's easy to see why he is such a popular suspect. But is he truly the man that did it? Definitely not. Hansen had absolutely no criminal record at all in his entire lifetime, despite what is often claimed. There's this very popular rumor out there that he was affiliated with organized crime in LA, but this wasn't true at all. As according to the police chief, these crime groups were very tribal. For example, one of them was Sicilian and the other was Jewish. Mark was neither of the above, so he would have never been trusted. So he was not an associate of such people like Mickey Cohen, Jack Dragna, and Bugsy Siegel. He also didn't have the necessary medical skills required to mutilate her body. Hansen's life was very much shaken up by Betty's death. That and an attempted murder by a striptease girl in 1949. Overall, Hansen is again easily debunked, but our next guy here rose to infamy for supposedly knowing about Betty through Hansen, and his name is Leslie Dillon. Leslie Dillon has one of the most interesting cases out of anybody, being that he actually contacted the LAPD himself, and he lived in Florida and not LA. The reason he contacted them was because he was an aspiring writer who was fascinated by the case after reading it. All we know about him from his life before this case was that he was a bellhop and, at one point, worked as a mortician's assistant for 3 weeks in Oklahoma City. He drove the ambulance for those 3 weeks for the record. Many people say that he was a morgue attendant, but this is not true. When contacting the LAPD, he would often have exchanges with a psychologist named Paul DeRiver, and during their exchange, Dillon said that he believed his friend Jeff Connors was actually responsible for this death. Eventually, this psychologist started believing that Connors never even existed, and Leslie actually created him in his head to cope with what he had done. DeRivers managed to trick Dillon into meeting him, leading to a long interrogation in which Dillon was treated very harshly. It's worth noting that DeRiver had a rather poor reputation in history prior to this event. He was not the most reliable of people. For about a day, it looked like the case was solved, but instead of confessing, Dillon sued. This led to a long public court trial which cleared him of any suspicion. The city of LA even had to pay him for all the damages. A key detail learned during this trial was that Dillon was actually in San Francisco during the date of January 15th, so it could not possibly be him. Now, a lot of people seem to claim that Leslie Dillon and Mark Hansen knew each other, but there is no evidence of this at all. The connection was only made because he was named a suspect during the grand jury investigation, launched as a result of DeRivers' mishandling of Dillon. All that came of it was a house investigation and a taped recording that revealed nothing involving Hansen, Dillon, or Betty. Leslie Dillon is often considered one of the most likely suspect, but this is clearly from people that either ignore evidence that proved his innocence, or people that never even really looked into him at all. So yeah, once again, this suspect is debunked. The next suspect is one that has become popular over the years, as he wasn't a suspect at the time. This suspect is actually a notable serial killer known as the Lipstick Killer. Yes, in recent years, many people believe that the Lipstick Killer was, in fact, the one behind this. So let's go over why this has become such a popular theory, because it's a pretty complicated one. If you don't know who the Lipstick Killer was, the title is pretty accurate. In Chicago in 1946, 3 women were brutally murdered, with one having a message written in red lipstick. It was an extremely disturbing case, but if you already know about this killer, I'm sure you are questioning something right now, and that is, how could it possibly be the Lipstick Killer if he was arrested in 1946? Being arrested in 1946, this date would obviously make no sense since the tragedy we're discussing happened in 1947. But that's where the theories come in. It's thought of by some people that the person who was arrested wasn't the Lipstick Killer. As of now, this theory most likely sounds like some ridiculous conspiracy, but the case is fairly controversial as to if the person who was actually arrested did the murders. There is evidence for and against this. The man who wound up being arrested and who served the rest of his life in prison was a kid named William Hirons, and he was officially arrested in 1946 when he was just 17. Keep in mind, tensions were high at this time because these killings were quite horrific, and the city of Chicago was demanding justice. With that being said, Hirons was caught after breaking into an apartment and pointing a loaded revolver at the police. The interrogation was unimaginably awful. He was reportedly beaten numerous times during this span and was also not given any food or water for 6 days. He was given a lumbar puncture without any painkillers. He was given the highly controversial truth serum without the consent of his parents, and when under the serum's effect, he claimed that his alter ego, George Merman, may have been responsible for the murders. The press went wild, saying that his persona, Murder Man, had been the lipstick killer. He underwent 2 polygraph tests, and they both came back as inconclusive. The thing is, though, is that in the 1953 novel Lie, Detection, and Criminal Interrogation by John E. Reed and Fred Inbow stated that, on the basis of the conventional testing theory, his response on the card test clearly establishes him as an innocent person. Although, once again, it's worth mentioning that polygraphs are not completely reliable. Other pieces of evidence pointing away from Hirons included his handwriting not matching the lipstick writing, and one person who may have spotted the killer reported the suspect was in his mid-30s. With all that being said, though, Hirons was barely an angel. He was a habitual liar and a serial burglar. One of the houses he robbed was awfully close to the third victim, Suzanne Degnan's bedroom. He reportedly knew more about the crimes than a child his age should have known, and his fingerprints were found at one of the victim's houses and on a ransom note. He also definitely fired a gun he stole at a window, wounding a woman, so he was clearly very violent. Innocent or not, William Hirons pled guilty to all 3 murders, resulting in 3 life-term sentences in prison, where he lived the rest of his life until March 5th, 2012, when he passed away. Because of the many controversies in this case, it's not surprising that some people think the actual lipstick killer fled Chicago and LA in 1946 and killed Betty in 1947. At first glance, this theory now makes the timeline more plausible, but in reality, that's the only similarity that is shared here. Besides the time span making sense, there isn't anything that matches between these 2 cases. The victims of the lipstick killer didn't really share anything much in common with the Black Dahlia murder, outside of the last victim being dismembered. Overall, this case just seems too hypothetical for me, because it involves a killer from Chicago fleeing all the way to LA and then taking another victim. I don't know about you, but it just seems a little bit far-fetched. And heck, it's even entirely possible the 3 victims weren't even killed by the same person, seeing how 2 victims were stabbed and the last one was chopped up. On top of it all, it's entirely possible that the real lipstick killer was actually the man that was arrested for it. There also really isn't a connection to Betty, so I don't really see this as being our man. There is, however, one other suspect that was also a serial killer, and he was known as the Cleveland Torso Killer. This one is immediately more convincing, because every single body that this man got his hands on was dismembered, and they were also done in a way that clearly shows expertise in the medical field. From the years of 1935 to 1938.
Now, this is the case that we just covered the other day. Same case, just so you guys know.
The Cleveland Torso Killer took an estimated 12 to 20 lives. Another noteworthy similarity was the type of victims he would seek out, which were nearly always drifters or homeless people, and with poor Betty basically being a vagrant, her profile matches up with the type of people this person sought out. Despite sounding extremely convincing from the surface though, when digging further into things, it starts to fall apart. For starters, while each body was dismembered, none of them were cut in half like Betty. All of his victims were either missing limbs or they were decapitated. The dates for this one is certainly strange as well, seeing how the spree abruptly ended for seemingly no reason in 1938. There are multiple theories as to why this spree ended so suddenly, such as the suspect either being killed or locked up. The torso killer was technically never found, but there was a man named Dr. Francis E. Sweeney that was taken away into a mental asylum in 1938, and this was right when the spree ended, which is pretty shady if you ask me. Sweeney was a former World War I soldier diagnosed with psychosis, and he had the necessary medical training to dismember a body. There's an alarming amount of similarities that suggest that he was likely behind the torso killings, but it still hasn't been proven for sure. And in reality, that incident would require a whole other video to talk about. Overall though, while being slightly more convincing than the lipstick killer, this one is still extremely unlikely. This theory, like that one, is based on the fact that this killer would have fled and just so happened.
And that makes a lot of sense, Aurora. Truly, I believe it could be a doctor, a surgeon, because of the way she was cut in half perfectly without touching any organs. You got to know exactly what you're doing to do something like that. So yeah, and definitely mentally ill, 100%. Seriously mentally ill. I agree with that, Aurora. Truly.
To arrive in LA and start killing again. There's also a much larger difference in the date of each event, which limits the likelihood of this one. Unlike the lipstick killer, the LAPD actually addressed the two cases' similarities. They concluded that there was no connection.
Agreed. Welcome, Trish. Good to see you. And yes, I agree with
The
you.
victims were all dismembered and hidden. They were not meant to be found. Betty was placed in a spot where plenty of people walked by every single day. She was meant to be found. And as a finishing touch, as we stated earlier, the bodies, despite sounding similar, actually do feature rather large differences.
Welcome, Lacey. Great to see you today.
Also take away from the plausibility of the connection. So those were two very dark suspects back to back right there. And while it's impossible to truly get lighthearted in a situation like this, these next few suspects are actually insane and perfectly encapsulate the sheer convolution this entire case has around it. And why not start with the absolute most insane one? One of the newest suspects to the Black Dahlia case was a man named Jacob Edward Fisk. He's noteworthy as he is one of the only suspects to have completed a dedicated Wikipedia page. And when you look at this page, you'll see the sheer insanity of his case. To put it in the simplest of terms, Jacob Edward Fisk doesn't even exist. That's right, Jacob Edward Fisk was a prank that, to me, perfectly summarizes just how convoluted this mystery gets. Mr. Fisk joins a depressingly long list of people like Ed Burns as people accused of killing Betty while at the same time not existing. If you actually read the Wikipedia page, it is stated that this...
Good point, Rhode Island. Good to see you today. Thanks for joining us. Great to have you. I love your guys' interaction with this, too. Thank you for that.
Fisk fella committed the act by traveling through time. Seems likely to me. This Wikipedia entry was actually added 10 years ago, and for some reason, he is still in the Black Dahlia Wikipedia as an original suspect to this day. Now, obviously, like stated earlier, this is a prank, and of course, isn't actually the suspect behind this all. But after going through some of the pretty dark ones, I thought this was an honestly humorous moment of brevity, and further goes to show just how insane this case can get. Next up on our long list of suspects is, like last time, a pretty crazy one, but obviously not as absurd as the last one. His name was Corporal Joseph Dumais, and his situation was quite strange. He was one of the early suspects involved in the case, and unlike most of these suspects, he actually completely admitted to being behind it all. The thing is, though, is that this was completely untrue. His reasoning for being behind it all was claimed to have dated Betty literally right before she was killed, and then claiming to have blacked out for multiple days during that span. This confession is easily debunked as being completely untrue. Firstly, we know that leading up to Betty's final days, she was with Robert Manley. And secondly, and more importantly, it was concluded that Dumais was actually stationed in Fort Dix, New Jersey during this time span. So, what he was saying was completely false. After this was proven, Dumais was dropped as being a potential lead, and the paper stopped covering him. The next question that we asked ourselves was, well, why would he do this? I first thought of a possible mental illness, but when looking, there was no confirmed cases of this being the case. The much more likely scenario was simply that he was just looking for notoriety and attention, which he definitely got as he was considered one of the top suspects for a short while. As we have shown though, of course, it wasn't him, so let's just move on.
What's wrong, SRB? What's muted? And yeah, Dan, I agree. That's one of the main reasons why I'm so into this era. I loved the clothing and stuff. You're okay. It's okay, SRB.
This next lead is another pretty ridiculous one, and is only a lead because of the ludicrous thinking of the 1940s. People thought that because Betty left her bags at the bus depot, and that she had survived a week without changing clothes, she had to have had someone with her. Naturally, they assumed it was a woman. They then very quickly jumped to the conclusion that it must have been a lesbian doctor, and this doctor killed Betty because of a love triangle. This side of the investigation has caused various retellings of Betty's story to list her as a lesbian, when that was not true. In fact, it was quite the opposite, as she was said to be quite homophobic. No, with such a ridiculous theory of her being killed by some hypothetical lesbian doctor, I originally dismissed this most likely non-existent suspect because I couldn't possibly rationalize that people actually believed in this theory. But this theory was actually mentioned countless times, such as James Ellroy's famous 1987 novel, Black Dahlia, and its subsequent 2006 film adaptation, making this one a pretty popular theory. Out of all the ridiculous suspects we have listed thus far, this one stands alone in the fact that there literally isn't even a suspect. This is all purely a hypothetical scenario derived from the thinking of the 1940s and the awful assumption that lesbians are murderous monsters. It is incredibly easily debunked in case you actually did believe this one, which apparently some people still do. Again, Betty was homophobic, which already throws this theory on its head. And also, the number of female surgeons at this time in the United States was remarkably slim. By the 1970s, the number of female surgeons in the United States was 6%, and a number that was even smaller in 1947. For both of these reasons and the ridiculous nature of this entire suspect, obviously this one is debunked. The next suspect we had to cover is the most important one in the entire video. And if you have any familiarity with this case, I'm sure you guys were getting ready for his name to be finally shown. And that is, of course, George Hill Hodel Jr. George Hodel is by far the most famous suspect in this entire case and among the public. He is commonly considered the man that did it, and this is all due to the actions of his son Steve Hodel, who was a former LAPD detective who came out with an immense amount of information as to why his dad was, in fact, the killer all along. Trust me, we're going to get to his claims, but first, let's take a look at George Hodel's life. George Hodel, in his earlier years, was a talented pianist at a very young age and a genius, scoring an incredibly high IQ score of 186. Whether this is true is unclear at best, as you'll soon see. A little later on, George Hodel operated a clinic that helped poor African Americans that lived in a part of town called Bronzeville. And in the early 1940s, he supposedly got into this extreme surrealist art movement where he befriended this man named Man Ray, which, believe me, is something we will get back to a little later. His first notable moment of controversy came in 1945, though, as his secretary, Ruth Spaulding, committed suicide. Steve claims it was murder, but we'll get to that. Fast forwarding to 1947, when Betty was killed, anyone with a medical background was under suspicion. In 1949, there was actually a trial against George by his daughter Tamar, who claimed that he was sexually abusing her. Because of that trial, George now came into the police's attention and was officially a suspect. After becoming a sudden hotspot for the police, they wiretapped his home, and these recordings gave us some of the most famous pieces of evidence regarding his case. But when you look more into them, you'll realize that these moments were wildly taken out of context. For starters, after having his house wiretapped for some time, they eventually moved on, clearly showing us that they didn't perceive any of his actions as being threatening. So that should really be more than enough evidence to dismiss anything you hear from these wiretapping recordings. But for the hell of it, we'll look into some of these moments anyways. The most famous moment in these recordings was when he said, "Suppose I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now." Now look, if what he said here was really as shocking as it had been made out to be, the cops would have came and arrested him on the spot. But after a few whole weeks of listening to him, they likely knew that George was aware of the recordings and didn't take such comments seriously. Anyways, like we stated a few times earlier, after some time, the police came up with the conclusion that he wasn't the killer after all, and simply moved on. Now, if you aren't familiar with the case, you're probably wondering why George Hodel is such a popular suspect in this case, and that's where Steve fully comes in. After George's death in 1999, Steve wanted to discover more about his dad. He claims to have found 2 photos in his basement when he was looking through his dad's stuff, and these 2 photos he found strongly resembled Betty, which sent him on a hunt to uncover the truth about if his dad was truly behind the Black Dahlia murder all along. He published his findings and became so famous that as of now, he's a best-selling novelist and he has appeared in episodes of TV shows like Ghost Adventures and The Dr. Phil Show. Even from the very beginning of this story, we can already find flaws in his claims. He wasn't even the first person to accuse George of being a murderer in a book, as that honor goes to a woman named Janice Knowlton. She accused George Hodel in 1998 of murdering Betty along with her father, George Knowlton. George Knowlton didn't kill Betty, just for the record. Janice was a troubled woman who suffered from mental illnesses and sadly took her own life in 2004. But when looking at Steve, there's a lack of credit there, as he instead mentions the photos. Which, speaking of, those 2 photos that he claimed were Betty have both been debunked. The first picture was identified as a person named Maria Marco, and the second photo was debunked by Betty's family themselves. Steve himself says that it doesn't matter if these photos were Betty or not, because they just serve to spark his interest in the case. And to that I say, yes, he is right about that. But the thing is, these two photos were the only evidence period that shows that they even knew each other, as there isn't any other evidence out there that shows that these two people actually knew each other at all. This is only the first point, but this foreshadows the consistent wrong information that Steve seems to deploy as evidence. You see, the amount of claims Steve Hodel has made is way too many to count. But for the sake of debunking his case, for you guys, we're going to show you guys a lot of them, and why they are completely false. One of the pieces of evidence that he likes using is the aforementioned case of the trial George Hodel had against his daughter, Tamar, who claimed he molested her. The thing is, though, is that he was not found guilty, and some of the information that was discussed during the trial was very telling. Tamar's mother during the trial explained that her child was a problem child and actually had a frequent history of claiming molestation against men. According to her mother, Tamar threatened molestation over a dozen boys in her high school, and none of them were ever charged. So Steve's main claim against his father, being this monster of a person, has been debunked. One of the other claims that George was this horrible person revolves around the whole secretary situation we discussed a while back. Steve, of course, claims that his father was behind it all, but remember that it was a suicide. One of Steve's other main claims against his father relates to his interest in the previously mentioned abstract art, where he befriended his artist named Man Ray. No, not that Man Ray, which supposedly gave George the inspiration to cut Betty's body after she was killed. The thing is, though, George barely knew Man Ray. Man Ray's life was pretty well documented, and there is actually an extensive archive of him online. But there is only one point in the entire archive where George is mentioned, and it's very impersonal. You'd think that if they were these intimate friends like Steve suggested, he'd at least be mentioned more times than once, or maybe even more thoroughly. But let's say that George didn't actually know Man Ray that well, and was simply inspired by his art, and as such, chopped up Betty as a result of that. Well, when looking through Man Ray's catalog, there is one piece of art called the Minotaur that Steve claims inspired George to do what he did. The artwork was simply the upper torso of somebody, and to me, at least, calling it the inspiration for Betty's body is such an absurd stretch. The photo was also only shown in French magazines exclusive to France. Someone like George would never have seen it. Now, obviously, that last point discussed the mutilation done to the body, and that works as a perfect segue into the next claim for Steve, which is the fact that his father was a skilled surgeon. But was he, though? Well, in short, no. While George did have some expertise in public health, and actually did run a clinic to help out poor African Americans at the time, there is absolutely no evidence that he was a surgeon. George couldn't even practice surgery because he lacked the certification necessary to practice it from the American College of Surgeons. Without that credential, he would never be allowed to practice it, and with a body that had work that could have only been done by an expert, George could never have done this, since there's no way he would ever be able to practice surgery in the first place. Steve also likes to claim
I'm going with you, Dan.
knew George was the killer, and there was a great conspiracy to cover it all up because George had blackmail on various LAPD officials and politicians. He further claims that in 1949, an abortion doctor named Eric Kirk was quickly arrested and thrown in jail. This was done to prevent him spilling the beans about George's illegal activities, and additionally cover up the disappearance and likely murder of a woman named Jean Spangler, another of George's supposed countless victims. He believes this because Spangler's purse was found with a note written to someone named Kirk. Steve also likes to claim that his theory garnered universal support among law enforcement. First off, people like Brian Carr, a modern-day LAPD detective, Gary Ingmanson of the Los Angeles Police Protection League, and Ed Jokish, who was a working officer in 1947, all heavily disagree with Steve's conclusions. Jokish especially was vitriolic, since he and his partner arrested Eric Kirk and thus was supposedly in on the conspiracy. So it's no surprise he pointed out several discrepancies with Steve's story. Starting with the fact Jean Spangler disappeared in October of 1949, and Eric was arrested in September of 1948, so he couldn't have been involved. Also, he wasn't quickly thrown in jail. His trial lasted until 1949. Both officers have stated that the abortion ring Eric Kirk was involved in had no blackmail on any LAPD official. Detectives like Finis Brown and Harry Hansen, the people in charge of the Dahlia case, were not involved in a cover-up. Neither was Chief William Parker. Captain Jack Donahue, or Chief of Detectives Thad Brown. These were good, honest people, and they really tried their best to catch Betty's killer. They had just so little to go on that it was nearly impossible to solve, so making them look like the type of people that would look the other way for a serial killer is, in my book, highly disrespectful. Corruption wasn't unheard of in the LAPD in the 1940s, but this isn't an example of it. For being by far the most famous suspect in the entire case, going as far as blatantly stating it when you Google who killed the Black Dahlia, it is pretty shocking that literally all of Steve's claims against his father have been completely debunked, completely ruling out any possibility that he was, in fact, the man that killed Betty. But just to show you how outrageous his claims get, he published a book in 2009 that also claimed his dad was the Zodiac Killer, just like how Larry was able to factually debunk all of Steve's claims in this Black Dahlia case. Longtime researchers in the Zodiac case were also able to completely debunk the connection there too. Now, since this video isn't about that topic, we aren't going to be covering it, but we will leave this site in question in the description below. Steve has also claimed that George was the real lipstick killer and the Philippines jigsaw killer. Basically, the reason why I wanted to mention these is to further let you all know not to believe Steve's claims like nearly everybody else does. Overall, Steve Hodel is one of those guys that you can listen to and just get sucked into, despite his enormous amount of incorrect information. When he speaks, you just want to believe him. For whatever reason, he is an incredibly convincing speaker, and this is obviously why he's become so famous in recent years. His experience as an LAPD detective also sounds like it might make him more trustworthy, but I cannot stress it enough that claims he has made against his father being the Black Dahlia killer are completely false, despite how convincing he makes them sound. So with all that being said, we only have one more suspect to talk about, and he was saved up until the end for an incredibly good reason. Let's just get right into him. The final suspect is Walter Alonzo Bailey, and the reason we saved him for last is because he's the only person out of every known suspect that has legitimate evidence that shows that he could have actually done it. Now, instead of talking about his early life and then why he could be the man who did it, like we have done with every other person on this list, I instead wanted to go through how Larry discovered it because it, yet again, featured some monumental research and is backed by some legitimately shocking moments. According to Larry, this all started in 1996, while he was researching this case for the 50th anniversary of the murder. People were sending in pieces of evidence they found that were marginally related to the case. The majority of these findings, while interesting, were in the end just throwaways. During this research, Larry consulted with the legendary criminal profiler John E. Douglas, famous for having played a role in the capture of the Trailside Killer and the Atlanta Child Killer. His conversations with infamous monsters like Charles Manson, David Berkowitz, Ted Bundy, and John Wayne Gacy helped advance understanding of criminal psychology. He's basically the inspiration for half the cast of Criminal Minds, and his book Mindhunters was turned into a popular Netflix show. Douglas put together a profile for the killer, and while even he would admit it's not perfect, it does narrow down the list a little bit. This is an abbreviated version of what Douglas wrote.
He was a white man, no younger than his late 20s and possibly older, with a high school education. He lived alone, made his living working with his hands rather than his brains, was adept with a knife, and was comfortable wallowing in blood. He was rigid, patient, compulsive, and deliberate. He drank alcohol, and when he was drunk, he became argumentative. He probably had a police record for either threatening or assaulting someone with a knife. The killer was under great personal and financial stress. He and Short spent several days together. He had been drinking. Maybe he had a physical handicap or stuttered and Short made fun of it, but she rejected him. The mixture of personal stress, alcohol, and rejection exploded into a murderous rage. Cutting the body in half was simply to make transportation easier. But the level of mutilation reflects a personal rage directed at Short. He was dehumanizing her and defeminizing her, and then he cuts that smile in her face. You can just imagine him saying, "Look who has the last laugh now." But why Norton Avenue? The killer took a high risk to place the body where he did because he wanted to put the fear of God in that neighborhood. Under the influence of alcohol, he is drawn like a magnet to that area. He must have had some connection to the neighborhood. Whatever the reason, Norton Avenue was a deliberate choice. Why weren't there other killings? Maybe the killer was never under the same kind of stress. Perhaps he died.
Again, like even Douglas himself stated, this profile most definitely isn't perfect. A lot of what he said was purely hypothetical, such as the age he came up with and the motive for killing that he came up with, among other things. But Douglas most definitely did raise some very interesting points, like why this location was chosen. Eventually, one day, Larry received a letter much like all the other ones he had gotten, but this one was a bit different, and it would send him down a fascinating direction. He received a photocopy of an old wedding certificate between Betty's sister Virginia and a man named Adrian West, and it showed that they got married in Inglewood. It gave an address, but he originally didn't think much of this and simply tossed it aside like he did with most of the other things he received at the time. One day, though, he decided to explore Inglewood and find the home where Virginia and Adrian got married. When he did, he was met with a shocking discovery. This home was on South Norton Avenue and was only 1 block away from where the murder took place. Because the certificate he had on him was a photocopy, he wanted to find a real copy just to make sure, and when he did, it relayed the same information. He now had 2 members of the Short family connected within a block of each other. It was addressed to Barbara Lindgren, so now Larry's next step was to figure out who she was. Figuring out who Barbara was a long and strenuous process. He started out by directly reaching out to Virginia and Adrian's children and gave him a backstory on how Adrian and Virginia met in the first place. Adrian actually enlisted in the Navy during World War II and was staying at the University of Southern California.
Welcome, DC. Good to see you, brother.
Program. During this, he was transferred to MIT, and this was when he met Virginia, Betty's sister. He was actually transferred back to LA at one point, and when this happened, he asked her to marry him, and she said yes. That's when a very quick, frantic wedding was put together. The minister who set the wedding up was from Adrian's church. The home the wedding took place at belonged to a couple from the church. The members of the wedding were all from the church, and one of these members was Barbara Lindgren. The address on the wedding certificate that had Barbara's name on it, after a ridiculous amount of searching, turned out to belong to Ruth Bailey, who was Barbara's mother. But Larry's heart dropped when he found out Barbara's father, Walter Bailey. Walter Bailey was a prominent surgeon. Now we have a man who knew Betty's family, only lived a block away, and was a surgeon. This is by far the most convincing lead out of anything yet. It doesn't end there though, because while the aforementioned information already makes him more likely than any other suspect listed previously, his motive still needed to be determined. Well, apparently in the mid-1940s, Walter Bailey was a prominent member of the LA medical community and even had a private workspace just 5 blocks away from the Biltmore Hotel, which was where Betty was last seen. Bailey was born on March 25, 1880, the second of 3 brothers and a sister. Bailey graduated in 1905 and quickly became the associate professor of surgery at the University of Southern California. He specialized in women's surgery and treatment. In 1910, he moved to a small town of Dawson, New Mexico, and worked as a surgeon for the coal mining company stationed there. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1918 and served in World War I as a surgeon. He left in 1919. After the war, he moved to Los Angeles and stayed there for the rest of his life. In 1946, things would change for Bailey, though. He lost his positions as the chief of staff at County Hospital and associate professor of surgery at USC. He was now under financial stress. To make matters worse, he found a woman named Alexandra von Partica. Sorry if I butchered that. Alexandria was a nurse, and this newfound romantic relationship caused Bailey to file for divorce. And to somehow make matters even worse, he also started showing the early signs of Alzheimer's disease, which was ultimately the cause of his death. He also suffered from a condition that causes the brain to physically shrink. A few weeks before he died, he changed his will and left everything to Alexandria. But because the divorce still wasn't final, Ruth carried out a lawsuit and spine-chillingly claimed that Alexandria knew a terrible secret about him that would ruin him if he became public. The type of condition that Bailey suffered from has been known to trigger violence in people with no record. People close to Bailey claimed he was a kind man, but he wasn't the same person he was in his final years. He was also very desensitized to violence, reportedly watching filmed autopsies and surgeries with his mistress while eating dinner. Another important detail is that Bailey had a son named Walter Prescott Bailey, who was hit by a car at the age of 11. Betty had a sob story she would use involving losing a son, and she would often use this to garner sympathy. Walter Prescott's birthday was January 13th, and Betty was killed either late on the 14th or early on the 15th. It's plausible that Betty had gone to ask Bailey for financial help and ended up staying for a few days. At one point, she may have mentioned the dead son story and accidentally sent the mentally ill doctor off. Now, that's completely a hypothetical scenario. It may not be why he did what he did, but the fact remains that Bailey's resume is way too convincing to overlook. He was a skilled surgeon. He lived 1 block away from the spot Betty was found at. His private workspace was 5 blocks away from the hotel that Betty was last seen at, and he was literally proven to know her, which would explain the missing pages in Betty's address book. You would only remove pages if she had written the killer's name down prior to her death. While not exact, Bailey fits John Douglas's profile better than any suspect in the case. It would also explain where there was no other murder quite like Betty's in LA history. If it was Bailey, this wasn't the work of a serial killer. Rather, it was one murder committed by a man with a quickly failing mind. The evidence in favor of Walter Bailey is far less flimsy than the countless other suspects.
All right. So that is the end of that one. Hold on here. One second here. One minute. So yeah, I feel like the last suspect is the one that I suspect the most. Sorry, guys, it's taking a minute to load. I'm trying to get it there. Give me 1 minute here. Come on, load up for me. Exactly, SRB. It seems to make the most sense, too, you know? Good Lord. We're getting there. I'm so sorry for the delay. We're getting there. I don't know why this is so slow again. Okay. As this pops up here, if it pops up, it's working on it. Agreed, Cap. To be able to cut that and not touch any of her organs makes no sense if you don't have that kind of training. You know what I mean? All right, guys. So I'm gonna give you a little quick little interview that they did with Mr. Hodel, claiming that his father was the one. But again, most people have debunked this, believing that it's not true. He tried to claim that his father was Zodiac and this guy, so it's like, come on.
The most infamous unsolved murder in Hollywood history is back in the spotlight, and one detective says he's finally cracked the Black Dahlia case.
Los Angeles, home to the stars of Tinseltown, the home also to murder. The horrific slaying of Betty Short, a.k.a. the Black Dahlia, has captured the imagination of the Southland and baffled the best minds in law enforcement.
The brutal killing of aspiring actress Elizabeth Short shocked Los Angeles.
Young, beautiful victim. All this during a time when serial killers weren't running rampant. It captured the public's imagination
And became the most famous unsolved case in Hollywood history. Now, the Black Dahlia murder is being brought to life in a new series, I Am the Night.
You remember that murder case? There's no information. You gotta remember where you are.
And after 72 years, the family of one of the key suspects is finally speaking out.
Dr. George Hodel. He was a brilliant man, a loving parent in many ways, but also, I'm sorry to say, a killer.
Yeah, isn't it shocking? And Steve Hodel believes his father was the culprit. He joins us now from Los Angeles. Steve, thank you for your time this morning. You've written 5 books on this case, and you allege that it's your father who did this. How did you go about investigating your own father on this case?
Well, actually, it was my father died in 1999, and certain effects came into my possession. And then he was a remarkable man. And of course, the first third of my first book goes into the heavy biographics. You kind of have to understand the man to understand the crimes. But basically, a remarkable individual. And I'm talking to my half sister on the phone a couple of days after his passing, and she says to me, "Well, you know, Steve, our father was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder." I said, "What the hell are you talking about, Tamar? Where is this coming from?" And she said, "Well, he didn't do it, but he was suspected by the police. They told me that back during the trial." Well, my half-sister and I had talked to maybe 20 minutes in 50 years. So this was a huge shock. Of course, I had become very close to my father in the last decade of his life. He had relocated back to the U.S. And there was no way. I said, this isn't possible. So basically, I started looking into it, and you know, I had been a homicide detective for 24 years with LAPD, and I'd been retired for 15 years, and never any hints or clues or anything. So I was confident that I'd be able to establish that he had nothing to do with it. And I started following the evidence, and actually relocated back to LA. And within a year and a half, I had built a case, much to my surprise, that took me 180 degrees in the opposite direction and actually became a fileable case. I submitted it in secret to the DA, and he said that he would file the case where my father's still alive.
So, Steve, just tell us about the evidence that you have. What did you find?
Oh gosh, well, it took me 5 books to do it, but basically to cut to the chase. First of all, they knew that she had been found at a vacant lot, posed and surgically bisected, not cut in half with a saw but it was a skilled surgeon. So of course that limits your pool right there. Well, my father had been a surgeon in his early years of doctoring, so he certainly had that ability. But then there were a whole bunch of things. Then I would discover that he actually knew her and was dating her. He had become a suspect in 1949 and arrested for incest, for having sexual relations with my half-sister Tamar back in 49.
Agreed, Ed.
Trial, he beat the case, but basically there were 3 witnesses present, adults. And so he was a powerful, what they called in that day, a high jingo. He was untouchable, and the head of LA County Health Department. And I started digging in, and eventually I built a case that would, basically open the door to the secret files, which nobody knew anything about. We got into those DA files, and lo and behold, he was the prime suspect all along. I mean, Steve Hodel could talk for 20 hours on why his father did it, but here we've actually got an independent, separate file locked away for 55 years.
And Steve, it's incredible because your dad basically confessed to the murder of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and his secretary. Why was he not prosecuted?
Well, actually, what they did was they tape recorded him, 18 detectives, 24/7 for 42 days, around the clock, and they got him not only to confess to the Black Dahlia murder, and these are not phone taps; these are like microphones hidden in the wall that he had no idea were there. And so he cops to paying police, and you have to understand LA was a very corrupt department back then. It was a real life LA Confidential, if you will. And so a lot of the cops were on the take, and Dad had a lot of money and a lot of power and a lot of influence. And he was performing abortions for the police department and the politicos of the day. And he was about to be arrested by the DA's office, who had actually taken over the investigation. And we're literally days away from arresting him, and he leaves the country. And he's in the wind. And you kind of have to understand the politics of LA at the time. Chief Parker, who's our most famous police chief, was about to take over, literally weeks away from becoming chief. And they thought, well, wait a minute, he's in the wind, he's gone, he's left the country. Maybe it's best if we just lock this away for now and keep it under wraps. We'll come back to it, but let's clean up Dodge, get rid of all the corruption. If we expose this now, we won't be able to assume power and do what we want to do. So that was a major factor, and of course, they were happy that he was gone in the sense that, he could reveal a hell of a lot about a hell of a lot of people. The sad thing is they never came back to it. They just locked it away. Actually, the LAPD destroyed all the files and the tapes, but the DA's office, the lieutenant in charge, kept a second set of books, locked him away. And then when my book came out with all the evidence, and the DA said he'd file, that opened up this vault and it revealed all the tape recordings.
And a lot of that is being revealed in this terrific new show, which is featured here on Stan here, the streaming service called I Am the Night. There's also the terrific podcast too, Root of Evil. Steve, thank you so much for your time this morning. Also, you can get Steve's latest book, Black Dahlia Avenger 3, and the Black Dahlia series is out there as well, and it's a fascinating read. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Good to be with you.
Okay, hang on here. Let's see here. Trying to find. One minute. All right. We're almost. Sorry, this is taking so long to load in, guys. Come on. Where's it at? Where's it at? Okay, so this says, I don't know. We'll see. He has too, Cap, and I think it's just it's for his own. Okay, so this supposedly gives a. It's going to go through the story per se again, guys, but it says it's solved per se via this. So Take it for what it is.
On the morning of January 15th, 1947, the city of Los Angeles was sent into a panic after the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was found surgically bisected at the waist, drained of blood, and bizarrely mutilated on a vacant lot. This infamous murder inspired the largest manhunt in the history of Los Angeles and captured national headlines. The LAPD vigorously searched for this sadistic, evil murderer with the entire police force in allocation of money and manpower. Police investigators failed to capture the identity of this psychopath responsible for this sadistic murder and mutilation of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, for whom the media called the Black Dahlia. During this extensive interview, you will also hear rare audio from Betty Bersinger, who discovered the body on that horrific morning of January 15th, 1947. For almost 72 years, this horrific crime remains unsolved until now. My guest this week is a retired LA police homicide detective turned private investigator with over 300 homicide cases during his 25 years as an LAPD detective. After retiring, he launched his own investigation into the Black Dahlia murder, and it led him to a shockingly unexpected perpetrator, his father, Dr. George Hodel. We will hear his story and what led him to believe that his father was the infamous murderer of the Black Dahlia. Retired LAPD detective Steve Hodel joins me. All right, first off, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time today because you have an incredible background. Please tell my audience a little bit about your background.
Okay, let's see. Born in Los Angeles, grew up here in the Hollywood area, kind of all around, and went into the Navy for 4 years at 17, got out, and basically joined LAPD. This would have been back in 1963.
Wow.
So Chief Parker was, Bill Parker, the famous chief, was still on the job then. Went through the academy, did 4 or 5 years in patrol, uniform patrol, bounced around to different divisions, which I think you guys back east call precincts, and then basically came to Hollywood detectives in '69. I went into detectives, kind of worked all the tables: burglary, auto theft, sex crimes, and then gradually worked my way to the homicide table, where I spent the next 17 years working Hollywood homicides, which is like one division of the 18. 300 murder cases during my career. Had one of the highest solve rates on the department, but it wasn't just me. It was my partners and a really good spirit of corps there that we worked together and had a great team during those years. So then I retired in '86. So almost 24 years on the department.
Wow. Amazing. So Steve, I mean, your extensive background, I mean, you retire, obviously you're a retired detective. Now your investigation into the Black Dahlia, which is a fascinating case. She grew up right around the corner over here in Medford, Massachusetts, which is my hometown. Talk about how you got into investigating your dad. Your investigation led you to that your dad was actually the murderer. How did you get into the investigation process?
Yeah, well, strangely, I was long retired, and I didn't go to it. It came to me. So my dad died after living overseas for many years. He came back and relocated back to the United States from Asia in 1990. And he had been gone for 25, 30 years or more. And basically, he relocated to San Francisco in 1990. I started seeing him on a regular basis and got to spend the last 10 years of his life with him. Close connection. I'd go up to San Francisco and visit him. He'd visit me, and with his wife, June. And then in 99, I got that fateful phone call, 3 a.m. in the morning. Was June, his wife, and she said, "Your father's collapsed. The paramedics are here. Just pronounced him dead. come down. So I caught the next flight and did all the things you have to do to take care of a parent's passing. We had become very close in that last 10 years of his life. And he had a remarkable life, which I extensively detail in my book, Black Dahlia Avenger. But basically took care of June and started that. And a couple of things were presented to me. Now, I'd been retired 16 years at that point from LAPD, and I was a PI doing mostly criminal investigations, a lot of murder cases, but private. And so basically, June brought out this small album, a photo album, like 3 by 5 inches, and said, I think your father would want you to have this. And I'm opening it up, and I'm going through it, and it's pictures of my mother and pictures by our family photographer, Man Ray, who was a famous surrealist photographer, and all sorts of things. And I come to this very attractive young woman, black hair, and obviously young, obviously taken in the 40s, had that style. And I said to June, who's this? And she says, I don't know, somebody your father knew from a long time ago. And I still to this day can't explain why Black Dahlia comes to mind, except that it looked very much, they had made a movie called Who Was the Black Dahlia in '75, television movie. And I thought it may have been from that, but anyway, a few days later, I'm talking to my half-sister about our great man's passing, and she says to me out of nowhere, she says, well, you know, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. And I said, wow, Tamar, what are you talking about? Where is this coming from? She says, well, it was during the trial, and we can talk a little bit about that later on. During the sex trial, she said, they told me that they were sure that he was the suspect in it, but she said he didn't do it. I'm sure he didn't do it. And that was that. And well, I'd only talked to my, well, that's that and a bunch of other things came. I didn't know much about the Black Dahlia. You know, I knew it was a famous unsolved from you know, the 40s in LA. And I had seen a few photographs going through the academy because it was our most famous unsolved. But other than that, I didn't even know her name, Elizabeth Short, you know. Anyway, I started looking into it, and I knew there was no way my father could have done the murder. I was very close to him, and I loved him very much. And a couple of more things came in. There was some handwriting from a note that the suspect had written up to the newspapers, and I looked at it, and it was my father's handprinting. I mean, you know your parents' handwriting, I know mine.
Right.
And I said, wait a minute, there's still no way this can be true. So initially, I started out in 1999 to show that he had nothing to do with it, to completely disprove it. And of course, I followed the evidence, and it took me, after 3 years, took me in a completely different direction.
Wow.
So that's how I kind of started into it. It came to me, and I, you know, was going to show that he was not connected at all in any way.
So, in your professional opinion, and obviously almost a 20-year investigation, there is no shadow of a doubt that your dad was the Black Dahlia murderer.
No, not anymore. Initially, I was going to, like I say, prove him innocent, and I spent almost 3 years following the clues and putting all the pieces together. Relocated back to LA, and did a massive amount of investigation. Submitted it in secret to the head DA at that time, a head deputy DA by the name of Steve Kay, who was the one that worked with Bugliosi on the Manson murders. And he reviewed it for 4 months, my investigation, all my evidence, and said, there's no doubt in my mind that he committed at least, and to my horror, not only did I discover he did the Dahlia murder, he was a serial killer, and he did there were a dozen lone woman murders that I present in my investigation, and that I think he's good for in the decade before he split the country. And anyway, Steve Kay reviewed it and said, most of these you're probably right, but he said, I have a very high, qualifying for a filing. He says, I would file too. I would file on Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and I would file on this other murder, Jean French, the red lipstick murder that occurred 3 weeks after. He says, the others you're probably right, but not enough to file. But those two, he says, I would file on, and I could win them in a jury trial. So based on that opinion, I went public with it. Had Kay said, well, maybe, but not enough, then I probably would have never written a book. But I knew I had made the case. I mean, if you're there or not,
Right,
I knew I was there because
Amazing.
it was so strong.
Fascinating. Steve, I want to get a little bit into Elizabeth Short's background. Obviously, like I said, she was born in Medford, Massachusetts, like I said, which is right down the street over here. And there's a lot of misconceptions about her. And, I watch all of these documentaries and these biographies, even the movies about the Black Dahlia. There was a misconception that she went out to Hollywood, to become an actress. Was that true?
No, absolutely not. In all of my digging, I never found any indication that that would support that. She ever even made contact with the studios. There are no records of her. Basically, Elizabeth Short was, as you say, she was born in Boston, but she grew up in the Medford area. She dropped out of high school. She was born in 24. She had four sisters. There was 5 girls. And basically her father, Cleo, left the family during the Depression, and he split and eventually came to California. And the mother,
And
Phoebe, he split.
Sorry to interrupt, but he split in a very weird way. He lost a lot of money in the stock market in the crash of, I believe, 29, and he left his vehicle on a bridge and just disappeared.
Right. Some people thought, well, maybe he committed suicide. And
Right.
The car was there by the bridge, and he was nowhere to be found. And but actually, I don't know how much of that is myth. It's hard to separate some of it. But eventually, she did hook up. So she dropped out of high school, but at 17, she reconnected with her father by letter, and he invited her to come out to California. He was living in Vallejo, which is northern area of California. And so she, left and basically came west to California, lived with him for a short time. They didn't hit it off. He wanted, according to reports, he wanted a housemaid, and she wanted more than that. So she split, and she got a job at Camp Cook in 1940. Of course, this is wartime now, 43. And at the PX, working there at the Post Exchange. And she, very attractive young woman. She was, 19 then, and 18, 19, and worked there for about 6-8 months. But basically, she had a thing. She wanted to fall in love with Lieutenant Wright and marry a military guy and live happily ever after. And so she was dating mostly military guys. Pretty quiet, introverted in some respects, extroverted in others. But in September of 43, she was in a bar in the not far from Camp Cook, and got arrested for minor possession. She was there with some adult military guys, and they were drinking. She wasn't drinking. But anyway, the cops arrested her. They send her home back to Medford, and she's there a short time, and then goes to Florida. She had a lung problem. She had bronchitis and always had breathing problems, and had an operation. So they suggested better for her to be in a better climate. So she went to Florida and met a military guy, and supposedly they kind of fell in love. He was Matt Gordon was his name, and that was like 43, 44. He went overseas, and she came to California, and unfortunately, at the end of the war in 45, he was coming home and he was killed in an airplane crash.
Mm-hmm.
So she kind of spun out of control a bit, I guess. Was dating some other guys, and but just never, she I think, she had her own problems, maybe some emotional problems, where she kind of fantasized about perhaps wishing there was more there than there was with guys.
Yeah.
She was kind of desperate, and went through a couple of other military boyfriends, and then basically went back to Medford for a short time, kind of back and forth, bouncing around. during those years right after the war. And then, go ahead.
I just want to set the landscape a little bit for my audience. We're talking mid 1940s. L.A. was truly like L.A. Confidential back then. And obviously, gangster Mickey Cohen was around, and he was paying off a lot of the politicians and the police as well. So it was a lot of guys came back from the war, so it was heavily populated, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it was, and it was. She liked it out in L.A. She loved L.A., and she came back out here, hooked up with another lieutenant, but that was short-lived. So she was kind of her own in Hollywood, kind of unemployed. She was paying $1 a day with 5 other girls in Hollywood, living there in an apartment, 5 or 6 of them in one apartment.
She was very transient. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, she was transient. Although she was, she was 3 or 4 months at a time. She'd be in an apartment and stuff, but she was having, and she had no real job. So she was,
right.
But all the rumors about her being a prostitute and a druggie, that was all BS. Absolutely untrue. She was a rather naive. She was 21, 22, going on maybe 16. That kind of thing, where she just was desperate to fall in love and get married to a military guy, and she would date guys, but very little. She didn't even drink. I mean, she would have soft drinks and stuff when she'd go to bars.
Welcome, Tina.
And I spend a whole chapter in my book rehabilitating her reputation and character, because a lot of these books that came along trashed her and turned her into a prostitute and a druggie, and none of that was true. Absolutely.
Right, and she, and they hit you with that cliche at the end of the documentary that she got fame at the end when she passed away, which is something that she was always trying to get while she was alive. They hit you with that cliche, which that was a big misconception.
That's right. It was, all she wanted to do was find Lieutenant Wright and live happily ever after. But all of the other stuff was just totally.
For those that are just tuning in, the interview we're listening to is with Steve Hodel. He claims that his father is George Hodel was the person that killed Black Dahlia, which was debunked per se, but he swears to this day that that's what it is. So that's why we're listening to this here.
And that's the problem. I mean, there's so many myths with this. I mean, the name itself, so let's fast forward to the January of 1947. She turns up missing. She just, she disappears. She's a friend of, she'd gone to San Diego for a month or two, and then she came back and was dropped off by a boyfriend or a casual friend at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA. And
was that Red Manley?
Yeah, that was Manley and Robert Manley, but they called him Red. You're right. And he dropped her off there, and she said she was going to meet her sister, who was coming down from the Bay Area, which wasn't true, but she actually she was meeting somebody there, but it wasn't her sister. So she was there like 3 hours, and she was seen in the lobby making phone calls back, waiting. And at about 9:30 at night, she's seen walking out the east door on Olive Street and turning right and walking into the fog. And that's where the myth begins. She's never seen again for a week. But actually, one of the first, there are a number of myths, 3 major myths that I point out. The first is this so-called missing week. There was no missing week. I was able to reconstruct by going through the 6 newspapers.
So you figured out what she did between January 9th and January 13th, 14th, or where she was.
That's right.
Where was she?
Well, she was all over the place. I got 14 witnesses placing her in Hollywood, in downtown Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, every day of that so-called missing week. And in fact, of those 14 witnesses, 7 knew her personally, so they couldn't be mistaken. It wasn't like, So she was actually accounted for at different locations every day of that week. And then on the last day, the 14th, she came running out. She was downtown in a bar, and she came running out and approached a policewoman, Merle McBride, who was an LAPD beat officer. And she said, there's a man in there that's threatened to kill me, and the policewoman calms her down and says, let's go back in. So he's gone, the man's gone, but her purse is there. She gets her purse. Thanks to the policewoman. And this is like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Hour goes by, and again, this policewoman is still working down there, and she sees her come out of another bar with 2 men and a woman. And she stops her and she says, are you all right? She says, yeah, I'm going to the bus to meet my father. He's coming down. And that's the last she's actually seen, and that's literally 12 hours before she's murdered. And I believe those individuals, based on my investigation, were my father, a friend of his by the name of Sexton, and we don't know who the woman was. But I think from there she was taken to my father's residence, where she was tortured for, and of course this is one of the horrible things about the crime. Right. Is what was done to her, 4 hours of torturing and stuff. Anyway, she doesn't turn up, so she's gone for a week supposedly, which isn't true. But that evening, the next morning, her body's found about 5 miles.
Yeah, I want to set that up, Steve. I want to set that. We have some rare audio by Betty Bersinger, who actually was the first person to come across the crime scene. We're going to hear that very rare audio right now.
Okay.
And as I was walking along, I happened to glance over at my side, and I saw this strange sight. It looked like a mannequin that had been cut in half and was separated and was lying there. And I didn't glance at it too long because I had my little girl with me, and I thought, gosh, as I walked on further, I thought, that just didn't seem right to me. And I thought, I could see these kids with their bicycles. And I said, maybe it'll scare those kids if they ride to school and see this. So I better, call somebody to come and at least have a look and see what it is. But the thought of a dead person did not enter my mind. I thought it was a mannequin because it was so white. I stopped at one house when I got through the block and got to the next block. There were homes built on that block. I went to the first home and there was nobody there. So then I went to the next house. I rang the doorbell and a woman came to the door, and I told her, I said, I saw something strange up the street, and I said, I just think I ought to call somebody and have them come and look at it. The further I walked away from him, the further I thought, well, gee, I wonder if it could be something, more than just a mannequin. It just didn't seem to me that made much sense. So anyhow, I thought I better call and tell the police and at least have them come out and check it. And so she said, well, yes, use the phone. So I called them, and somebody answered from the police station, and I told them what had happened, that I'd seen this, and I said, I thought somebody ought to come out, and check it out. And they said, fine, they would, and I hung up.
Okay, so Steve, let's talk about that crime scene what Miss Bersinger said. Let's get into that crime scene, because she wasn't just thrown there on the lawn, just thrown out of a vehicle. She was placed.
Yes.
Was she not?
And that becomes a very important part of my later investigation. You're right. She was carefully posed with her hands above her head. She was also surgically bisected, cut in half at the waist. And we're not talking about a chop job here or a sawed. We're talking about skillfully surgically bisected. It was a medical procedure taught in the 30s. It's called hemicorpectomy. And it's the only way you can divide the body in half without sawing through bone. And so they knew from the get-go that whoever did this had to have been a skilled surgeon. I mean, it can't be done. I mean, some of the coroner surgeons said I couldn't do as good a job as the killer did. So right up from the get-go.
What type of, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what type of doctor was your father? Was he an actual surgeon?
He did surgery in his early years. He got into administration later, but during after graduation, he went on to become the sole surgeon at a mining camp during the 30s. Yeah, he was highly skilled in surgery.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and then of course there were all sorts of the face was there was a smile cut in, the lips were extended ear to ear, and this savage but very carefully scalpeled carving. And then there was the right breast was removed and placed inside her private parts, and just horror after horror. She was bludgeoned to death. And
now, was there also a rose tattoo that was cut off?
Yes, she had a rose tattoo on her left thigh, which was cut out and placed inside her rectum. I mean, she was savagely tortured for. Surgeons estimate probably took about 4 hours. Body was washed clean, scrubbed clean, carefully placed there. There were cement sacks that were used to transport the body from the crime. So that wasn't the crime scene because there was no blood there. They knew it was done somewhere else, in a residence, which would have been our residential home at the time. And now we're talking about in 1947. So, and she was placed on top of these 50-pound cement sacks to transport to the scene, and then carefully placed there. And the sacks were found. There was about 5 or 6 of these 50-pound cement sacks and fertilizer.
Incredible. And like I mentioned, Steve, I mean, I said back in 1947, Los Angeles really was like an LA Confidential. The reporters were actually on the scene before the police. Is that true?
That's true. Yeah, a team of reporters got there first and started taking pictures. So they actually got crime scene pictures, unofficial crime scene pictures, but the ones that were shown in the newspaper were, airbrushed over, not to show, the bisection and stuff. Right. But yeah, they were there first, and in fact, when the police arrived, the uniform were the first to get there after Betty Bersinger called it in. They supposedly drew their guns down on these guys, and the reporters said, "Wait a minute, we're so
right.
Basically, but the detectives that got there, the homicide guys, were shocked. I mean, they had never seen such sadistic brutality, and that's kind of a couple of things came together to make this LA's most famous unsolved, and one was, of course, the name Black Dahlia, which came with the horrors of the torture and all of that. But along with that was the name Black Dahlia, which came from actually Elizabeth was going to a soda fountain in Long Beach, which is south of LA. And the military guys there that knew her, they called her the Black Dahlia after a movie called The Blue Dahlia, which came out about 4 months earlier in the summer. And it was a film noir movie. And actually, the Blue Dahlia was a bar, not a person, but they called her the Black Dahlia. And the reporters got a hold of the soda fountain and got that information. So you've got, and plus you also have to understand that this is just before television. This is like the last of the big print stories. And so all those things came together, and it went kind of what we'd call viral today. Across the nation,
because it was in the newspapers for a long time.
Yeah, it was headlines above the fold pretty much for at least 30, 40 days straight. Wow. And the newspaper guys, like you say, were they were ahead of the cops because they didn't have the financial restrictions and stuff. So they were, there were 6 newspapers in LA, big newspapers, and they were all spreading out looking for information all over, and so they were usually ahead of the cops, and all of this was being put in the newspaper. I mean, today that we wouldn't have had 20% of the information I got from the newspapers wouldn't have been available now. 80% would have been kept hidden. So that helped me a lot in as far as my ongoing investigation. There was so much put out that shouldn't have been.
I mean, what was the reaction in the Los Angeles area? Were they all panicked because there was a serial killer on the loose? Did you interview anybody?
Yeah, there was a lot of, and that was one of the killer's main signatures was he was an urban terrorist. Okay. He wanted, because what he did was he started sending in letters and notes, cut and paste. He sent in about a dozen notes over the next month. Catch me if you can. I'll give myself up for 20,000. Blah blah blah. And sending in cut and paste notes. And most of them were the handwriting was hidden and disguised. But there was one that was on the front page that my girlfriend was sending me up. I was living up in Washington State at the time when I first started this, before I relocated down. She was sending me up all the newspaper stuff, and on the front page was this handwritten note from the killer saying, "Turning myself in on Thursday, January 29th. Had my fun at the police. Signed Black Dahlia, Avenger." And I saw that, and it's my father's handwriting. And I said, wait a minute, there's no way, and this was the only one that was undisguised. And I said, but still, I said, there's no way, there's got to be, he's pretending to be, what's going on here? So, that definitely got my attention. And, but his whole motive was to terrorize the city. And he would do that in other places too, on other of his serial killings. But LA was terrified, and, it was huge. Every morning, every evening, newspaper had these,
and dozens of people guys turned themselves in.
Yeah, they had at least 17 that I know of false confessions. These guys wanted their 15 minutes of fame and stuff, and so that kept them busy, just excluding them, and basically they worked on it. The cops worked on it for 2 or 3 weeks, and then it kind of died down until he did his second murder. And the killer goes out and he does another abduction of a woman, takes her to a vacant lot, strips her nude, beats her to death, poses her body, takes lipstick and writes on the nude torso of her body an obscenity, F-U, and signs it BD for Black Dahlia. This is 3 weeks after the Dahlia killing. So they know that one is linked, definitely. And the handwriting is also, eventually I would have my handwriting expert confirm that was the same writing as the Black Dahlia, and that there are a whole bunch of other things that I'm able to put that together. So that's the second one that Steve Kay, the head DA, says he would file on. And of course, that's more terror in the city, and
right.
And he keeps going, and basically, it keeps going up until 1949, the end of 49, when, as you say, it was a real life LA Confidential. Half the LAPD was corrupt on the take. The reason we didn't have any mafia like you guys had in the East Coast is because the cops were the mafia. They were keeping them out, and they were running prostitution, gambling. So, So basically, what happened was I put it all together. The book comes out in 2003, and a lot of publicity. I do a lot of Dateline and 48 Hours and all of these television stuff on it. And what it does is it blasts open a secret file in the DA's office. And what we find out, now this is after publication.
Definitely, Paul.
A few weeks after publication. It blasts open a secret DA Black Dahlia file in the DA's office, and actually a journalist by the name of Steve Lopez, who's a famous columnist here in LA Times, went to the DA and said, "Hey, there's this Hodel guy. He says his father's the Black Dahlia killer." He says, "I don't know." And the DA coolly says, "Well, I'm not spending a dime reinvestigating a 50-year-old murder, but he says, there's a box in the vault if you want to look at that." And of course, Lopez says, "Do I? Yeah." So he gives them. They go to the vault. He gives them this box. They take it up. Lopez sits down and opens it up, and out falls a picture of Dr. George Hill Hodel. So he was the prime suspect all along. And what we find out is, and Lopez writes it up. He says, "Well, he was a real suspect," and he writes up a couple of quick articles. and that's it. So I go down and said, hey, can I make copies and review all of this? Cooley, to his credit, allows me, and I make a copy about 800 pages, spend the next 4 or 5 months putting it together. And what we have is a 146-page transcript with confessions, tape-recorded confessions. These were electronic surveillance of our home, where my father's recorded admitting to killing the Black Dahlia, admitting to killing his secretary, which he was investigated in 45 on, suspected by LAPD, and admitting to payoffs to police, law enforcement, sheriffs, police, LAPD, and it's just on and on. So there's a 146-page transcript. And all of this had been given to LAPD, but it was all removed and disappeared from their files. So the DA that actually investigated it, a guy by the name of Frank Jemison, hid a second set of books in the vault. So we would have never known, because all of this, today's LAPD didn't even know about it. So thanks to this, one DA lieutenant, all of this was preserved, and it confirms, and these are tape recorded, 18 detectives, 24/7 for 42 days, staked out, and these are not phone taps. Yeah, it's amazing, and but you kind of, to understand the whole thing, you kind of have to understand my father and his biographics, because he was an amazing individual. He was much more than just a doctor. He had all sorts of things going on, and I don't know if we have time to go into all that, but
right.
If you want me to give a bio or not, or do we? Where are we on time? Are we okay?
We got about another 15 left.
Yeah. Do you want me to go into that, a quick bio, or do you want to?
Yeah, you want to do a quick bio? Do a quick bio real quick.
Okay. George Hodel, born in 1907, downtown Los Angeles, child prodigy, musical prodigy at 9 years old. He's going to be a famous pianist. He's playing his own concerts at the Shrine Auditorium in LA. He graduates from high school in South Pasadena at 13. He goes to Caltech, one of our most prestigious universities out here, at 14. Has an affair with a professor's wife. She gets pregnant. She goes back east, breaks up her marriage. He's, after a year at Caltech, he's asked to leave, obviously. He becomes a crime reporter for the local newspapers here, one of the big papers, the LA Record. He's riding around. This is now, we're into the 20s. He's riding around with LAPD, Prohibition, of course, Vice Squad at that time, busting doors and taking names and writing these articles in the paper. He graduates, starts writing around with LAPD Homicide, Crime Guys, writes about their murders. Hooks up with one of his high school friends, is a guy named John Huston, who was the son of the famous actor Walter Huston. Of course, John Huston will grow up to become a very famous film director. Maltese Falcon, African Queen, Sarah Madre. And anyway, they're buddies, they're high school buddies, and they're double dating a couple of girls, Dorothy and Emilia. George is dating Dorothy. Then after a couple of weeks, they reverse. John starts dating Dorothy. They fall in love, go back to Greenwich Village.
Very much so, team.
And Emily and George look at each other. I said, "It's you and me, babe." Dad goes north. She gets pregnant. Dad goes north to Berkeley, pre-med, 4 years, then across to UCSF, graduates, gets his MD, does some doctoring and surgery during the 30s in Arizona and New Mexico on the reservations, comes back to LA. By this time, 7 years later, Dorothy has broken up with Houston. She gets back with George. They get married, and my older brother Mike comes along in 39. I come along in 41. Younger brother Kelly comes along in 42. Dad buys a Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. home in Hollywood, a Mayan temple. We all move in there, and that's actually where the murder occurred, in this Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. home 7 years later. So then Dad joins the health department, rises to the top, becomes the head of LA County Health Department VD control. He's kind of the VD control officer for all of LA. A lot of corruption. He gets involved with, LAPD, So basically, he becomes untouchable. You know, he's he's performing abortions, on, and he's committing. In the meantime, he's literally moonlighting with murders. He's 43 to 50. He commits about 10 murders. He's about to be arrested on the Dahlia case. Splits the country, goes to the Orient, reinvents himself, has 4 more children with another woman. And in 1990, he comes back. He's now got 11 children by 5 different women, and he's back in San Francisco. So I mean, you know, and he was a surrealist. His Man Ray was a famous surrealist photographer, artist, was our family photographer, and Dad's personal madness was based around surrealism and the posing of the body.
Right.
Is all connected to Man Ray's artwork. So there's just that's why it's taken 5 books to tell this story.
Right. Folks, joining me on the phone is retired police homicide
Same here,
detective
Aurora.
Steve Holdell. Please visit steveholdell.com and check out his incredible books that he's written. I believe you have a book coming out shortly. Is that true?
I do. It's Black Dahlia 3. It's the 3rd version, and it's just a lot of. There's going to be some blockbuster new information included in that, never before released, and it goes into a lot of the Hollywood aspects and a lot of the Hollywood elite that Dad knew, all of those connections and stuff, and how it all comes together. Yeah.
Steve, I want to circle back real quick, if we can, to the crime scene.
Sure.
Tell my audience how the mother, Mrs. Short, found out about her daughter being murdered.
Well, they called the editor of one of the newspapers had one of his guys call her, and basically, as the story goes, he tells her, your daughter's won a beauty contest. And she had actually won a beauty contest at Camp Cook where she had worked. Camp Cutie is what it was called. And she had actually won a beauty contest, but he kind of used that as a ruse to get as much information on her as he could. And then at the very end, he says, well, we're real sorry. We have to tell you that she's been murdered. So, I mean, it was, it wasn't exactly as a lot of them have portrayed it, where it was just really cold-blooded and cold-hearted. It was, they wanted to get as much information as they could, and they weren't lying. I mean, she had won a beauty contest. So, but it's just a little bit, it's just the way they did things back then. And a lot of people have been offended by that, but I think it's been distorted a bit.
Right. In terms of evidence, Steve, at the crime scene, I mean, she was, like you said, she was naked, but some of her valuables were found in a barrel a couple miles away, like her shoes and her purse.
Yeah. So I have a map that, like I say, it's the vacant lot is about 6 miles south of Hollywood, and halfway between Hollywood and the post where she was posed, the shoes and the purse were found, but they were picked up by the garbage collectors and taken to the dump. But the owner of the cafe had seen them and on top of the trash can and told cops. They went out and actually located the purse and the shoes at the dump site. They went through that and actually had this Red Manley identified them as her purse and her shoes. Shoes were distinct. They had some taps on them, so he recognized them right away. And the other thing, the most important, I was able to connect physical evidence from our residence, our home, to the posing scene by these bags. I was actually able to locate in the UCLA archives. They had original records of Frank Lloyd Wright Jr.'s receipts. He worked on the building of the house, and in there was a list describing these 50-pound cement bags that were purchased. And they were purchased 2 days before the body was found, or they were at, I was able to establish they were at the house. So, that connected it directly to the crime scene, which was pretty amazing with the original receipts that he had used. She wasn't placed inside the bags. She was placed on top of them after being washed clean, probably to keep the blood out of his car.
And her father did not go to the morgue and identify her, nor did he go to the funeral.
Yeah, I mean, best we can tell, he was pretty much of a jerk. I think.
Yeah, right. I was gonna say it, but
yeah. He, I think he had a drinking problem, and but he didn't want any part of it. He almost kind of like disowned her and stuff, and it's a sad situation, but sometimes life is like that. And yeah, but she was identified by family members at the coroner's office.
Fascinating. It's just truly a fascinating crime, murder that still fascinates the public. I mean, to this day, almost 72 years later, it's fascinating.
Yeah, well, we're hoping to put together. I mean, there's so much. It's so involved, and there's so many rabbit holes that we have to go into that we hope maybe we can get a mini series or
Right.
something like that. There's a lot of interest right now, so I'm working on that. And
excellent.
Maybe we can get that together.
Yeah. Were there any arrests from this case?
Yes, there were many arrests. A lot of them were false, as we've talked about, false confessions and stuff. It was pretty easy to arrest them back then. It's not like you really needed much, to go on. But nothing that ever stuck. And there have been all kinds of different theories on who done it, and the problem the other theorists have with it is that this is the serial killing. LAPD knew from the get-go that it was a serial killer, and they knew that at least 4 or 5 were linked. So these people that come along and write these books and say, with their one suspect, it ain't gonna fly. They have no way of explaining it, so they try and say, well, it wasn't. And the other interesting thing, I don't know if the first reference to the Black Dahlia, I don't know if you're familiar with, but I know you're familiar with the famous movie Sunset Boulevard. First time the Dow was ever mentioned is in that movie, which came out in 1950.
William Holden, right?
That's right. Sunset Boulevard with Gloria Swanson and William Holden. And there's a scene in there where Holden, whose name is Joe Gillis in the movie, he's a screenwriter. Yeah, and he goes into a party, a New Year's Eve party with this Artie Green, who's played by Jack Webb.
Yes.
And there's this great line in there. It's a laugh line in the movie. Now, this is only 2.5 years after the murder. And the line goes, Jack Webb, or Artie Green says, "Fans, you all know Joe Gillis, the well-known screenwriter, uranium smuggler, and Black Dahlia suspect." and they all laugh, and this is just a couple of years after the murder. So
wow,
yeah, it's an amazing. Next time you watch Sunset Boulevard,
yes, I will. I'm watching Cecil B. DeMille has a cameo in it.
That's right, he did. Yeah.
Steve, I want to ask you. I mean, would there be a way with today's technology to extract any DNA samples from your dad and her?
Absolutely. I've got my dad's full DNA profile.
Oh, okay.
Letters and stamps he wrote me. So I have that. So all we've got to do is get them to analyze DNA on any one of these, multiple murders. And, there are stamps on the letters that he sent in as the Black Dahlia Avenger. It's just a matter of testing that. And I've come up with new information on some of the other linkage. They've never even looked at the other connected crimes as for DNA. So it's one of the problems is that they can't deny the evidence. I mean, the DA said clear it. The chief of detectives says go ahead and clear it unless you can find some big holes in Hodell's. Well, all they can say is we don't have time to look at it. We're too busy with current stuff, which is BS, total BS. But it's they don't want to do anything to step on what they think would step on the image, and of course the cover up. And the big thing, which we don't have time to go into, was there was actually a murder occurred during the tape recording, the stakeout. A woman was beaten to death, and I'm reading it in the transcript. I can't believe it.
Who was the stakeout for?
For my dad. They went
for your dad.
Yeah, they went and staked out our house in 1950, and they recorded these confessions, but they also record him and another guy go downstairs. They hear a blunt object hit a woman. She screams, more blows. She screams again. I'm reading this transcript. I'm saying, what the hell? Why aren't they out the door? They're 5 minutes away.
Right.
doing a rescue. I couldn't believe it. So that's really the main reason it was covered up was at the time, and you have to kind of understand the history of LA and what was going on. Parker was just weeks away from becoming the new chief. He couldn't have this come out at that time. So I'm sure they said, look, let's lock this away. We'll come back to it, in a few years. But right now, let's get into power. And once we're in power, we can clean up Dodge and, get rid of all the crooked cops and that.
Right.
And that's the main reason it was locked away, was because of this actual murder on tape.
Amazing. Steve, this has been great. I'm fascinated by this case, which is one of the reasons why I was so happy to have you on the show and to give your insight. And without a doubt, you're telling my audience that your dad was the Black Dahlia murderer.
Without a doubt, absolutely.
Wow.
Way beyond any reasonable doubt.
Wow. Fascinating.
Jury
Folks,
would convict.
to read some of his fascinating books, please go to stevehodell.com, and hopefully he can have a television series that we can all get involved with, because it's
That's going to do it, guys. That's the story. Everything about it that's out. There's more info about some of the other suspects, but not much. And that's pretty much it right there. That's the Black Dahlia as of today. The Steve Hodel, I just don't. Something's not right with him, in my opinion. He's almost positive that his father. Yeah, I mean, he is positive his father did it. I'm not. I don't like the way that he's bringing it out. He seems excited about it. He seems like, overly excited and happy about the situation, which he shouldn't be. I wouldn't be bragging about it like he does, but he is. Yeah, Aaron Kosminski, yes, that's true. So, I don't know. I don't know what to think of old Steve here and or his dad. Yeah, he's definitely bragging on it. It's kind of weird to me, but that's to our knowledge as of right now. That is the scenario with the Black Dahlia. I hope you guys enjoyed the story and got something out of it. It's a little crazy, but of course you guys can catch the movies. There's a couple different versions of the movies to go read to see that side of it. Read the books. And of course, we have Google. So it's definitely an interesting story and a great case. Hopefully, maybe one day there'll be a true, actual answer to it. That would be amazing, I would think, but we never know. So thank you guys for joining me here today. I appreciate you very much. There's a grand possibility I will be out here in a few hours again. If you're interested, look for me. If not, understood. Thank you to my Blue Crew once again. I appreciate you guys very much. Couldn't do it without you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing all of you again soon, guys. Don't forget to love yourselves and love each other. Don't change nothing. You guys are the beautiful people. And don't forget, if you can't trust yourself, who can you trust? And I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye, everyone.